My father slid the envelope across the table like he was paying a bill. Not to me, to my brother. And before I could even process what I was seeing, he looked straight at him and said, "Calm as ever? This is his now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Tell me something. What would you do if the one moment that was supposed to celebrate your future turned into a public announcement that you didn't matter? Would you scream? Cry? Walk out? Or would you do exactly what I did? And just sit there, completely numb, while your whole life rearranged itself in front of a room full of people? Because that's what happened to me. My name is Lena Carter, I'm 27, and until that night, I really believed I understood my family. Not perfectly. Not in some Hallmark movie way. But enough. Enough to think that if my parents promised me something, especially something tied to my wedding, they meant it. Enough to believe that whatever weird tension had always existed between me and my younger brother, it had limits. I was wrong. The engagement dinner was supposed to be simple. Elegant, but simple. My fiancé, Ethan Hayes, had booked a private room at this downtown restaurant with low amber lighting, polished glass walls, and those ridiculously expensive floral centerpieces that look effortless because someone else spent hours making them that way. Both of our families were there. My parents. My brother Dylan, who was 24 and wearing the expression of a man who had never once worried about consequences. Ethan's older sister, his parents, a couple of close family friends. And then it was intimate enough to feel personal and public enough to make a scene impossible. Or at least that's what I thought. At first, everything looked normal. Too normal, actually. My mother, Karen, kept smiling in this brittle way that never quite reached her eyes. My father, Richard, was unusually formal, like he'd rehearsed whatever version of proud father of the bride he wanted everyone to see. Dylan was in a fantastic mood, laughing too loudly, leaning back in his chair like the evening had been organized in his honor. And Ethan? Ethan was quiet, not detached, not nervous, just watching. That should have told me something, but I was distracted. I'd spent the whole day trying not to overthink every little detail, whether my dress was too much for a family dinner, whether my mother would make one of those backhanded comments disguised as advice, whether Dylan would somehow turn the conversation toward himself. He had a talent for that. He always had. Still, I told myself tonight would be different. Why? Because this dinner mattered. Not just because it was our engagement dinner, though that was part of it. It mattered because it felt like a checkpoint. A moment when everything I'd worked for, my career, my relationship, the life Ethan and I were building, would finally be acknowledged by the people who had spent years treating my accomplishments like background noise. I wasn't asking for a parade, just respect. Just one night where I wasn't the practical daughter, the patient daughter, the daughter who could handle herself. And yes, there was another reason it mattered: the wedding fund. My parents had talked about it for years. Not constantly, but enough that it had become fixed in my mind as something real. Something settled. A fund they said they'd been building for my future, partly from long-term savings and partly from money my grandmother had intended for me. Anytime I tried to downplay wedding costs or say Ethan and I could manage on our own, my mother would brush it off. "That's what the fund is for." My father would nod and say, "You'll have what you need." So when that envelope appeared for one suspended second, I thought maybe this was it. A dramatic dad moment. Maybe embarrassing, sure, but harmless. Maybe he was finally going to make a toast and hand over the paperwork or a check or whatever symbolic gesture he'd decided on. Instead, he pushed it to Dylan. And Dylan did not look surprised. And that was the first thing that really cut through the shock. He didn't blink, didn't laugh awkwardly, didn't say, "Dad, what are you doing?" No, he just looked down at the envelope and smiled. A small smile. Controlled. Like this was expected. Like he'd been waiting for the room to catch up. I turned to my mother, because surely she was going to step in. Correct it. Explain it. She didn't. She lowered her wine glass, folded her hands neatly in front of her, and said, in that soft voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable no matter how cruel the words were, "Family comes first." I actually remember the pause after that. Not because it was long, but because it felt deliberate, like she wanted me to lean into the hope that I had misunderstood her. Then she finished. "Not you." The room went dead. Not literally. And of course, Somewhere outside our private dining room, silverware still clinked. A server still passed by. Someone in the main restaurant laughed. But inside that room, silence. The kind that makes your skin go cold. My face was hot. My hands were freezing. And the strangest part was, I still didn't fully understand what had happened. I knew enough to feel humiliated, betrayed, but not enough to make sense of the scale of it. Had they really given my wedding fund to Dylan? All of it? Why? For what? How long had this been happening? Who else knew? I looked around the table, hoping to find one face as confused as mine. Instead, I found avoidance. My father stared at the envelope like the matter was settled. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Dylan sat there with that awful little smile. I'm one hand resting on top of the paper like possession was already law. Ethan's parents looked stunned, but too polite to interfere. One of my mother's friends was suddenly very interested in the bread plate. It was amazing, honestly, how quickly a room full of adults could decide that silence was safer than truth. And then I looked at Ethan. He hadn't said a word. He was sitting beside me with one hand flat on the table, his jaw tight, his eyes moving from my father to the envelope to Dylan and back again. He wasn't confused. That hit me instantly. He wasn't shocked in the same way I was. Angry, yes. Controlled, absolutely. But not blindsided. That should have scared me. Instead, it anchored me. Because in that entire room, he was the only person who looked like he understood what was happening. And more importantly, the only person who looked ready for it. Then he pushed his chair back. Slowly, deliberately. Every head turned toward him as he stood, buttoned his jacket, and reached for the microphone set up near the center of the room for the toasts. Dylan's smile twitched for the first time all night. My father's expression hardened. My mother went pale. Ethan lifted the mic, glanced at me once, and said very quietly, "Should I?" That was the moment I realized this night was about to become something else entirely. The money was gone before the dinner ever started. That's the part that still gets me. Not just that my parents humiliated me in public, but that the betrayal had already happened in private. Quietly, neatly, behind smiles and reassuring phone calls. The dinner wasn't the crime, it was the ceremony. And if you've ever had that sick feeling that everyone else got the script before you did, then you already know what the week before that dinner felt like. A few days earlier, I was sitting at my apartment kitchen counter with my laptop open, trying to finalize a rough wedding budget. Nothing glamorous, just real numbers. Venue deposit, catering estimate, photography. The kind of boring adult spreadsheet that somehow decides whether your dream day feels possible or reckless. Ethan was in the living room answering emails, and I remember feeling oddly calm, grounded. I'd finally reached that stage where the engagement haze was fading and real life was taking over, which, honestly, suited me fine. I've always been better with plans than fantasies. That's when I logged into the family-linked account where the wedding fund had always been held. I wasn't even checking because I was worried. I was checking because my venue coordinator needed confirmation on timing, and I wanted to know exactly when I could move money without creating chaos. Simple, practical, normal. Except the balance was wrong. Not off by a little. Not maybe I misremembered wrong. Wrong enough that my stomach tightened before my brain fully caught up. I refreshed the page once. Then again. Same number. Lower than it should have been by enough to matter. I stared at the screen so long, Ethan eventually walked in and asked, "What happened?" I told him maybe nothing. Maybe a transfer hadn't posted correctly. Maybe my father had moved some of it temporarily. Even as I said it, I could hear how flimsy it sounded. And that was the thing about denial. It always sounds reasonable when you're desperate for it to be. Ethan came around the counter and looked over my shoulder. He didn't touch the laptop. Didn't crowd me. He just asked, "Have they said anything about moving money recently?" "No," I said. Then I paused. "Not exactly." He picked up on that immediately. Ethan was good at that. He had this calm, almost unfair ability to hear the meaning underneath the words people chose. Not exactly means yes. And that's when all the little comments I'd ignored started lining up in my head. My brother Dylan talking nonstop the last month about some huge opportunity he couldn't fully explain. Or my mother casually mentioning that families sometimes had to support the person who needed it most. My father being weirdly evasive every time I asked when we should start transferring wedding funds into my own account. He'd say things like, "There's no rush," or "I'm managing it," which at the time sounded annoying but not threatening. Now it sounded like a warning I'd missed. I called my mother first. Big mistake. She answered on the third ring, cheerful in that performative way she used when she was around other people. I asked her, as evenly as I could, whether anything had been moved from the wedding fund. There was this tiny pause. Not long, but long enough to feel like she was choosing a costume. Then she said, "Your father may have shifted a few things around temporarily." Temporarily. That word did so much work in my family. Temporary meant don't ask questions. Temporary meant let your father handle it. Temporary meant if this hurts you, try being more mature about it. "How temporary?" I asked. "Oh, Lena." She gave this soft laugh like I was making things dramatic. "You always go straight into panic mode." I didn't. I almost never did. That was the irony. Dylan blew up, disappeared, made impulsive disasters. I organized, adapted, absorbed. But in my family, the person who noticed the fire was always labeled the problem, not the one holding the match. "Mom," I said, sharper this time, "how much was moved?" Another pause. Then, "Your brother is dealing with something important." There it was. No number, no explanation, just Dylan. Always Dylan. I hung up before she could say anything else, mostly because I didn't trust my voice. Ethan didn't pressure me. He just waited. That's one of the reasons I loved him. He never treated my emotions like puzzles to solve for me. He let me have them. After a minute, I said, "They used it for him." He leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "How sure are you?" I looked at the screen, then toward the window over the sink, where the late afternoon light was turning everything gold in the most insulting way. Sure enough. What made it worse was that none of this existed in a vacuum. Dylan had always been my parents' exception to every rule. When I was 19 and working 2 jobs during college because I didn't want to take on extra loans, he was finding himself after dropping half his classes. When I bought my first used car with my own savings, he got help with a down payment because he needed reliable transportation. When he maxed out a credit card starting some short-lived online resale business, my father called it entrepreneurial instinct. If I had done the same thing, it would have been proof I wasn't responsible enough for adulthood. And still, some part of me had believed the wedding fund was different because it had my grandmother attached to it. My grandmother, June, had been the only person in that family who saw me without comparison. She used to press folded $20 bills into my hand when I visited in college and say, "For your future, not for emergencies, for joy." When she died, my mother told me she had set aside something small for me, something that would go into the wedding fund one day. Not enough to change my life, but enough to mean something. Well, enough that I held on to it as proof that at least one person had wanted me to start my next chapter feeling chosen. And now, even that felt contaminated. Later that night, I called my father. He answered in his usual clipped way, already sounding irritated before I said a word. I asked him directly whether he'd moved money from my wedding fund into Dylan's account. "Yes," he said, just like that. No apology, no hesitation, no attempt to soften it. I actually sat there in silence for a second, because somehow the honesty was more jarring than another lie would have been. "It's temporary," he added. "He has something time-sensitive. That money was for my wedding. That money was for family," he said. "And right now, your brother needs it more." I could feel Ethan watching me from across the room, not intruding, just there. And I asked my father the question I should have asked years earlier. "Did you ever intend to tell me before I found out myself?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You're marrying a man with a solid career. You'll recover. Dylan doesn't have that kind of safety net." There are sentences that change how you hear every previous conversation. That was one of them. Because buried inside it was the truth. They didn't protect me because I was strong. They neglected me because they assumed I'd survive it. And maybe they were right. Just not in the way they expected. The next morning, Ethan found me at the kitchen table again, still in the same sweatshirt, coffee gone cold beside me. I'd barely slept. I was angry, yes, but underneath the anger was something worse. recognition. The awful, named slow realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern reaching its logical conclusion. Ethan sat down across from me and said, very carefully, I think there's more going on than a family loan. I looked up. What do you mean? He held my gaze for a second too long, like he was deciding how much to say. Then he reached into his bag and set a folder on the table. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. The money didn't just disappear, it was moved with intention. And once that thought settled in, everything changed. Let me ask you something. What's worse, someone making a bad decision in the moment, or someone planning it, step by step, knowing exactly how it would hurt you? Because by the time Ethan opened that folder, I was starting to understand this wasn't impulsive. Mom, this wasn't temporary. This was deliberate. He didn't slide the documents toward me right away. He just rested his hand on top of the folder and said, Before you look at this, I need you to stay calm when we go to that dinner. That word again. Calm. Everyone wanted me calm. Reasonable, easy to manage. I almost laughed. You think I'm going to make a scene? I think, he said carefully. They're expecting you not to. That landed harder than anything else he'd said so far. Because he was right. My entire role in that family had always been built on predictability. I absorbed things. I rationalized. I adjusted. Even now, part of me had been preparing to go to that dinner, smile politely, and try to have a private conversation afterward like this was just a misunderstanding. Ethan tapped the folder lightly. They're counting on that, I swallowed. What's in there? Proof, he said. And context. He opened it. Inside were printed bank statements, transaction logs, timestamps, things I'd barely glanced at before because I trusted the people involved. But laid out like this? It told a completely different story. The withdrawals hadn't happened all at once. They'd been staggered. Small enough at first that if I wasn't actively checking, I wouldn't notice. Then larger amounts. Then finally, one significant transfer, the kind that dropped the balance to what I'd seen the night before. This started 3 weeks ago, Ethan said. 3 weeks, I repeated, my voice flattening. He nodded. Right around the time your brother started talking about that opportunity. I flipped through the pages, my hands colder with every line. Dates, on amounts, authorization codes. My father's name attached to each one. They didn't even try to hide it, I said. They didn't think they had to, Ethan replied. That silence again. Heavy, familiar. I kept scanning until something else caught my eye. Wait, what is this? Near the bottom of one page, there was a note tied to the account structure. Something I'd never paid attention to before. Legal ownership details. Ethan leaned forward slightly. That's the important part. I looked up at him. Explain. He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because he was choosing timing. Your parents set up that account years ago, he said, but it's not just theirs. I know, I said. It's a family account. It's co-registered, he corrected. Under your name, too. I frowned. Oh, okay. But they manage it. Managing isn't the same as owning. That's when the shift happened. Not emotional, not yet. Structural. Because suddenly this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about authority. Are you saying... I started, then stopped. I'm saying, Ethan continued calm as ever, that a portion of that money, especially anything tied to your grandmother's inheritance, legally belongs to you, not them. My chest tightened. Then how were they able to move it? They had access, he said, but access doesn't equal permission. I stared at him. So, what they did? Might not be legal, he finished. There it was. Not messy family drama, not hurt feelings. Something else entirely. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing now in a completely different direction. And because if that was true, if they hadn't just betrayed me emotionally but crossed a legal line, then this wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a conversation. This was something that had consequences. Why didn't you tell me all of this sooner? I asked. Ethan met my gaze. Because I needed to be sure. And now you are? Yes. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. That steadiness did something to me. It didn't calm me, not exactly, but it sharpened me, focused me. For the first time since I'd seen that missing balance, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something. What do we do? I asked. Ethan closed the folder gently. We wait. I blinked. Wait? For the dinner. I almost stood up. Why would we wait? We can confront them now. Today. And they'll deny it, he said, or minimize it, or twist it into you being selfish. That's already happening. Exactly, he said. So we don't play it on their terms. I crossed my arms. Then whose terms? A small pause. Ours. That word hung in the air. Ours. Not mine alone. Not his alone. A unit. He continued. They've already planned something for that dinner. You can feel it, right? I thought back to my mother's strange tone, my father's avoidance, Dylan's sudden confidence. Yes, I admitted. Good, Ethan said. Then we let them go first. My stomach dropped slightly. You're saying we walk into that dinner knowing what they've done and just sit there? Yes. And then what? He looked at me for a long second. Not cold, not distant, just measured. Then we respond, he said, and something about the way he said it made my pulse spike. Not fear, anticipation, because Ethan wasn't guessing. He had a plan. I exhaled slowly. You're being very calm about something that could destroy my relationship with my family? He didn't flinch. I think they already made that decision. That landed harder than anything else, because deep down, I knew it was true. The rest of that day passed in a strange blur. I went through motions, answered emails, took a call, pretended to function, but everything felt like background noise compared to what was coming. Every message from my mother felt staged. Every casual text from Dylan felt loaded. And that night, just as I was about to go to bed, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it once, then again. His expression didn't change much, but I saw it. That subtle shift, or that confirmation. What is it? I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time since this started, there was something almost sharp in his voice. Exactly what I expected. My stomach tightened. Which is? He locked his phone, set it down, and said, They're not just giving him the money. A beat. They're announcing it. Everything inside me went still. Public. Intentional. Final. Ethan stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Whatever happens tomorrow, don't say anything right away. I held his gaze. Why? Because in that moment, I realized something else. This wasn't just about what my family had done. It was about what Ethan was about to do, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. My mother said, Not you. And just like that, everything stopped pretending. Have you ever had a moment where the truth doesn't arrive gently? It just drops, heavy and undeniable, right in front of everyone? No confusion left. No room to reinterpret it later. Just clarity. Sharp and public. That was this moment. The air in the room felt thinner, like breathing required effort. My ears rang slightly, not from noise, but from the absence of it. Every conversation at the table had collapsed into silence, and yet somehow I could still hear everything. The faint clink of glass, someone shifting in their chair, the soft rustle of fabric as people avoided looking directly at me. And right in front of me, Dylan rested his hand on that envelope like it belonged to him, like it always had. I watched his fingers press down slightly, almost unconsciously, as if confirming it was real. His expression wasn't exaggerated, and that would have been easier to hate. No, it was controlled, satisfied, the kind of expression you wear when something goes exactly the way you expected. That's when it hit me. He knew, not just suspected, not hoped, knew. I turned my head slightly toward my father. You gave him everything? My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. He didn't hesitate. He needs it. Not an explanation, a justification. And I don't? I asked. My mother answered this time, her tone softer but somehow sharper because of it. You'll be fine, Lena. There it was again. That assumption, That quiet dismissal disguised as confidence in me, as if resilience made me less deserving. Around us, people shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's parents exchanged a glance. His sister looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. No one wanted to step into it. And because stepping into it would mean choosing a side, and no one chooses the side that makes the room explode. So instead, they waited. They watched. They let it happen. I could feel something building in my chest. Not panic, not even anger exactly. Something steadier, something colder. The kind of realization that doesn't rush, it settles. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't emotional. This was a decision they had made about me a long time ago. And tonight they just stopped hiding it. I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my chair. And that's when Ethan moved. The sound of his chair sliding back against the floor cut through the silence like a blade. Not loud, but deliberate enough that every single person at the table turned toward him instantly. Dylan's smile flickered. Just for a second. My father straightened slightly. In his jaw tightening, my mother's eyes widened. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to show she hadn't expected this part. Ethan stood up fully, adjusting his jacket with that same calm precision he had shown all week. No rush, no visible anger, just control. And that was new. Because up until now, Ethan had always been respectful around my parents, measured, careful. He never challenged them directly, not because he agreed, but because he understood the dynamics and chose his moments. This was a moment. He stepped away from the table and walked toward the microphone stand set up near the center of the room, the one that had been meant for toasts, for lighthearted stories, for celebration. Not this. Every step he took seemed to stretch the tension tighter. In conversations from the main restaurant filtered faintly through the walls, completely disconnected from what was happening inside our little bubble. He reached the microphone, picked it up, tapped it once, just enough to draw every remaining ounce of attention. "Sorry," he said, his voice even, carrying effortlessly across the room. "Before we continue?" He paused, and that pause? It wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. Because now everyone was locked in. "I just want to clarify something." Clarify. Such a harmless word, but the way my father's shoulders stiffened told me he understood exactly what was coming. Ethan's gaze moved across the table slowly, not rushing, not avoiding anyone. He looked at my father, my mother, Dylan, then finally at me. And in that glance, there was something steady, grounding. Like he was anchoring me before everything shifted. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers. I felt my heartbeat pick up, not from fear, but from recognition. The folder. Dylan noticed it too. I saw it happen in real time, the moment his confidence cracked. His posture shifted. His hand tightened slightly on the envelope. His eyes narrowed just enough to signal that whatever this was, it wasn't part of the plan. Good. Ethan held the papers up slightly, not dramatically, just enough that they were visible. "Because this money," he continued, his tone unchanged, "wasn't yours to give." Silence. Heavy, immediate, absolute. My mother's face drained of color. My father's expression hardened into something sharper, more defensive. Dylan's smile, gone. Completely gone. And suddenly, and for the first time that night, they didn't look certain anymore. They looked exposed. Ethan took a small step forward, the papers still in his hand, his voice steady as ever. "And I think everyone here deserves to understand why." My breath caught, because whatever came next wasn't just going to explain things. It was going to change them. "This account," Ethan said, holding up the papers, "is not solely owned by Richard and Karen Carter." No one moved. No one even pretended to. Because now, this wasn't family tension anymore. This was something else. Structured, documented, undeniable. Ethan placed the papers gently on the table in front of my parents, turning them so they could read them first. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just precise. "It's co-registered," he continued. "I under Lena's name." My father didn't reach for the papers. That told me everything. So Ethan kept going. "The funds tied to this account, especially the portion transferred from her grandmother's estate, legally belong to her. Not partially, not conditionally, directly. There it was, clear, clean, irrefutable. A murmur rippled through the room, subtle but present, the kind of reaction people have when something private suddenly becomes public and serious. My mother finally spoke, her voice thinner now. This isn't how we. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't interrupt harshly. He simply continued, overriding her without force. The transfers made over the last 3 weeks, he said, tapping the documents lightly, were authorized without her direct consent. Now my father leaned forward. I have access to that account. You do, Ethan said calmly, but access doesn't equal ownership. That line landed harder this time, because now everyone understood it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line crossed. Ethan turned slightly, addressing the room. Not just my parents now. A total of $48,000 was transferred, he said, in increments, then finalized in a larger withdrawal. The receiving account is under Dylan Carter's name. Every word tightened the air. Dylan shifted in his seat. For the first time all night, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The confidence that had filled him earlier had nowhere to stand now. That money, Ethan added, can be legally reclaimed. There was no threat in his tone. That made it worse, because it meant this wasn't emotional. And it was already thought through. I finally stood up. My legs felt steady, surprisingly steady. And when I spoke, my voice didn't crack. You didn't just take it, I said, looking directly at my parents. You planned it? Neither of them answered, because there wasn't an answer that could undo what had just been laid out in front of everyone. You waited, I continued. You moved it slowly. You made sure I wouldn't notice until it was too late. And then you chose tonight. I gestured slightly around the room to make it public, like I wouldn't fight back. My mother shook her head quickly. Lena, that's not what this is. Then what is it? I asked. Silence. Not confused silence, cornered silence. My father finally spoke, but the authority in his voice was gone, replaced by something tighter. Controlled, but strained. Your brother needed help. And I didn't, I said. You have stability, he replied. You have support. You'll recover from this. There it was again. That same logic. But now, in this room, under this light, with everything exposed, it didn't sound reasonable. It sounded calculated. I nodded slowly, not agreeing, understanding. You didn't think I'd do anything, I said. He didn't respond, because again, there was no point denying it. Ethan stepped slightly closer to me, not taking over, not speaking for me. Just there, a quiet alignment. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift completely. Not just in the room, in me. I'm not discussing this here, I said finally. No, not anymore. My mother looked relieved for half a second, until I added, but this doesn't stay here either. That relief vanished instantly, because now they understood. This wasn't ending at the table. Aftermath. We left the restaurant without another word. Not dramatically, not rushed, just done. Behind us, the room stayed quiet. No one tried to stop us. No one tried to smooth it over, because there was nothing left to smooth. Outside, the air felt colder, but clearer. I exhaled, long and steady, like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. Ethan glanced at me. You okay? I thought about it, about everything that had just happened. And for the first time since this started, the answer wasn't complicated. I am now. The next few weeks were precise, not chaotic, not explosive, just methodical. Ethan connected me with the lawyer he had already consulted. We reviewed everything again: account structures, transfer permissions, documentation. The same facts he had presented at dinner, now formalized. My parents didn't fight as hard as I expected, not because they agreed, because they couldn't. Legally, the position was weak. The paper trail was clear. The intent, once exposed publicly, made it worse for them to argue otherwise. Dylan, on the other hand, tried avoidance first, then deflection, then silence. In the end, a large portion of the money was returned. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. Enough to restore what mattered. Consequences. The real shift wasn't financial, it was relational. My parents stopped calling as often. When they did, it was careful, measured, and like they were speaking to someone they didn't fully understand anymore, because I wasn't playing the same role. There were no more shared accounts, no more vague reassurances, no more automatic trust. Dylan and I, we didn't fight, we didn't reconcile either. We just stopped. Whatever version of a relationship we had before, uneven, strained, but still present, collapsed under the weight of what he had accepted without question. And maybe that was the clearest consequence of all. Not anger, distance. Final resolution. The wedding still happened, just not the way it was originally planned. Smaller, simpler, paid for by Ethan and me, entirely. And somehow it felt more solid because of that. No conditions, no hidden expectations, no one quietly deciding what we deserved. On the day itself, there were no grand speeches about family, no symbolic gestures, just real ones. Ethan standing across from me, steady as ever. Me, standing there without hesitation, choosing this, fully. And as I looked around at the people who were there, the ones who showed up without strings attached, I realized something that hadn't been clear before. Support isn't what people promise. It's what they prove when it costs them something. Later that night, after everything was over, after the music and the conversations and the quiet moments in between, I found myself standing alone for a second, just taking it in. Not the decorations, not the details, the feeling. Peaceful, earned. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard my mother's voice again. Family comes first. I let that sit for a moment. Then quietly, and I answered it, if only to myself. They never said which one. And now I knew exactly which one I chose.